Right now, you think you are cold because you don't have enough insulation, not enough clothing, or the right sleeping system, but that is only the surface level explanation. The real problem is much deeper and far more dangerous. You are blind to how heat actually behaves around you. You look at a wall and see concrete, you look at a building and see structure, you look at a city and see objects. But in reality, none of these are just objects. They are systems of energy exchange. Heat is constantly moving from warmer zones to colder ones. It leaks, it accumulates, it gets stripped away by wind, it gets absorbed and released by mass. And as long as you cannot see these processes, every decision you make is based on guesswork. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't, but over time you lose because the game is not played on the level of things, it is played on the level of flows. And the moment you shift your perception, the moment you stop seeing objects and start seeing energy movement, you unlock something that feels like a new sense, almost like thermal vision. And from that point forward, you are no longer reacting to the cold. You are predicting it, avoiding it, and even using it to your advantage. And that is where survival stops being random and starts becoming controlled. But the moment you begin to see this, the first thing you notice is the most obvious one: walls, especially heated building walls. They radiate warmth outward. And if you stand close enough, you can feel it immediately. Your body picks up that radiation and you get warmer. And at first, this feels like a solution, something simple and accessible, but it is extremely limited because that heat exists only in one direction. It is fragile. It depends on the inside temperature, the thickness of the wall, the outside conditions, and most importantly, the wind, which can strip that heat away almost instantly, and you are still losing heat from every other side of your body, meaning you're not in a warm environment. You're just borrowing a thin layer of warmth for a short period of time. And that forces a more important question: where does heat not just pass by, but actually stay? Where does it accumulate and create stability instead of momentary relief? And that question leads you to thermal mass, to places like underground garages, concrete structures, enclosed environments where massive amounts of material absorb heat during the day and release it slowly over time, creating a stable microclimate where temperature changes are gradual instead of extreme, where wind is eliminated, where you are no longer chasing heat, but existing inside it. And this is a completely different level of survival because now you are working with stored energy instead of transient exposure. But the moment you find that stability, you run into a completely different layer of reality, one that has nothing to do with physics, human systems, because these places are not neutral. They are owned, monitored, controlled. There are cameras, security patrols, access restrictions, and suddenly heat is no longer just a physical resource. It becomes a controlled asset, something you can lose the moment you are noticed. And this creates a new kind of pressure because now survival is not just about finding warmth, it is about maintaining invisibility. You have to move differently, behave differently, blend into the environment, avoid patterns that draw attention. And this is where survival shifts from a technical problem into a social one, where your understanding of people and systems becomes just as important as your understanding of energy. And eventually, this constant tension leads to a natural question: why depend on spaces that can reject you at any moment? Why rely on systems you don't control when there is a source of energy that is completely open, constant, and massively powerful? And that source is the sun. A thermonuclear reactor delivering roughly 1,000 watts per square meter under clear conditions, an energy flow so large that most people ignore it simply because it feels passive. But the moment you start thinking in terms of capture instead of presence, everything changes because now you are not stealing heat from buildings, you are harvesting it directly from the largest available source. And this shifts your mindset from dependency to control. But even this has a fundamental limitation, and that limitation is time, because the sun disappears. And when it does, your entire system collapses with it. The temperature drops rapidly. Your environment loses its input, and you're left with nothing but residual heat that fades quickly. And this creates a critical bottleneck, because you cannot carry the sun itself, but you can carry its energy. And this is where storage becomes essential. Batteries allow you to convert a temporary input into a delayed output, to move energy from day into night, to create continuity where none naturally exists. And at this point, it feels like you have solved the problem. You have a source and you have storage. But this is where most people make a fatal assumption. They believe they can recreate normal living conditions. They assume they can power a heater and generate comfort, but the numbers immediately destroy that illusion. A standard electric heater consumes around 1,000 watts, while portable battery systems can only deliver a fraction of that for any meaningful duration, which means your entire energy reserve could be drained in minutes. And this is where the real shift happens, because you are forced to abandon the idea of heating space and instead focus on heating the body directly using minimal, targeted energy, small devices, direct contact, insulation strategies that reduce loss instead of increasing output. And this is not about comfort anymore. It is about efficiency, precision, and survival under constraints. And once you reach this level, another question appears: where do you even get these resources? Because batteries, systems, all of this costs money. And this is where perception shifts again, because modern cities are filled with discarded energy, old electronics, power banks, batteries that people throw away, not because they are empty, but because they are inconvenient. And what looks like trash to most people becomes a resource to you, stored energy waiting to be recovered. And this transforms you from a consumer into a scavenger, someone who extracts value from waste. But even with batteries, you quickly realize they're only half the system, because energy is not static, it must flow. Every battery eventually drains, and once it does, you're back to zero unless you can recharge. And this moves your focus from what you own to where you can connect. And suddenly the city becomes a network of energy access points, libraries, cafes, stations, public outlets, places where electricity is constantly available. And survival becomes
Perfect.
a matter
This
of
design is
movement
finally
and
done.
timing, of
Wait,
knowing
what's
where
that
to go,
smell?
when to go. And
Fire! Hey, people, fire's on fire! I have to gas! Help!